Welcome back to Bennett's BikeSocial. I'm Michael Mann, and this is episode 23 of our Better Riding series, powered by Honda Motorcycles UK, of course. So if you want sharper skills, smarter tips, and the confidence to ride better than ever, then stick around because we've got plenty to share. But you don't have to take my word for it, because back again is our expert riding coach, Mark McVeigh. He's an ex-MotoGP engineer, founder of a riding academy with over 20 years experience, and he's the mind behind Moto DNA rider training tech. Mark's helped more than 20,000 riders now become smarter and safer and more confident. And here he is, all the way from Australia.
G'day, Mr. Mann. How are you getting on there today?
Hello, boss. Well, it's -3 here, so yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right inside. I'm a little bit. I was so close to riding into the office this morning, and I thought -3, and I was on an R12 GS as well, so I thought it doesn't really add up. How are you, mate?
Good choice. Good choice. Yes, I'm not -3. Let's probably what are we? Probably high 20s today. So yeah, but I will not dwell on that. We get a lot of height from the UK in the winter time.
Yeah, of course, back end of your summer now, isn't it?
It is. It's toasty.
Okay, Mr. McVeigh, what are we going to learn about today?
Yeah, so group riding myths, essentially. So, there's a lot of advice there around group riding, and there's nothing quite like it, for uniting riders, the camaraderie, the gear, the coffee. But, there's all this formations, peer pressure, different abilities. And kind of when those things collide, the outcomes can be, not so good.
There's a lot of risk, isn't there, with group riding? And presumably we're going to cover all those risks and how to avoid them in today's episode, right?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, risk is the big thing. And, essentially being a motorbike coach, with all those thousands of riders, my job's a risk manager, essentially. And to give you an idea how much risk there is in group riding, I've got this awesome photo, and I would rather be doing this on the track than riding on a road with a group of riders that I don't know. And this is Phillip Island.
Wow.
And we'll talk a bit about this a little bit later as well, but just to give you an idea, that's what I'd rather be doing than riding with a group of unknown riders.
I can see the Moto DNA logo on the leathers in the front there, so that's clearly you. And I recognise the helmet from the bloke in the middle. That must be John McGuinness, MBE.
It is. And Bo Beaton, another fast rider on the back there. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that just shows you my attitude towards group riding.
You'd rather be on the track than on the road.
Exactly.
But Mark, I know that what you do with motorbikecoach.com is very, very evidence-based, isn't it? How does that weave into group riding?
Yeah, exactly. And, I think this is going to sting a little bit, this video, because we're going to kind of look at riding advice that's been around for a long time. And it's, there's been a lot of riders hurt and that will, go through. So it's going to be a bit challenging, but, our training system, it's all based on aviation principles, so we address these common crash scenarios. And as always, the first thing we want to look at is, what problem are we trying to solve? Now, with group rider crashes, there is limited data, but there is a little bit of information. I find this in the UK, and this is motorbike crashes involving other vehicles. And you can see, it's up nearly 2,000 motorbikes have, collided, over a few years. But, even though we got limited data, if we talk to the rider community and we look at the news, group ride crashes are actually quite common. And we'll just flick through, don't want to dwell on the negative stuff, but we'll just flick through, So, this first one, there's a group of 40 riders and 4 riders collided. And, there's quite a lot of serious injuries there. In this one, there was 10 riders, actually mowed down. That was very serious. And in this one, there was a car plowed into a group of riders, and the riders were all so close. There's a bunch of them got knocked down. Same with this one, multi-bike crash. And then this one, there are a whole bunch of crashes, with groups of 40 riders. So, there's definitely a problem, let's say, with group riding.
Clearly, there's a lot of group riding crashes, and I think we've probably all heard about them or maybe even witnessed them, unfortunately. But why does that standard group riding advice fall apart?
As always, there's not just one thing, but it's a kind of mix of problems. But I think the first thing to talk about is, these formations, and this is kind of typical of what you see, the advice that's given out. This one's from America, but you have a look around the internet and it's all very similar. This riding formation, staggered. And the problem is, we've spoke a lot about the safety bubble and why the line is dynamic. So that's the kind of first thing to discuss. And then the next thing is, the buffer. So, basically, you're talking about a second here. But of course, the safety bubble, you're moving laterally in your line. So suddenly that, you're across here and that 2 second gap is 1 second and everybody's kind of bunched up. And we know from, research and all the conversations that we have had, the perception time is a second, right? To really understand, oh, there's a kind of problem here. And then the reaction time to before, to actually start doing something like go for the brakes, that's about a second. So at 100 kilometers an hour, that's 55 meters before you've actually started swerving or braking, right? So this is kind of, one of the things I really want to kind of discuss about this and kind of lean more to the safety bubble aspects. So yeah, these group dynamics, with the herd mentality, they tend to kind of diffuse a responsibility and rather than keeping riders kind of individually accountable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. That graphic says it all, doesn't it? You just can't ride like that because the conditions, the other road users, the weather, it all makes it different. I appreciate that it's it's sort of a generic rule, but when you're going around a corner, for example, or if there's a pothole or if there's something to avoid on the road, it's totally impractical, and you're far too close. We've probably all been there as well. Whether you're riding with two other riders or 10 other riders, it makes a big difference. And Mark, that leads me on to my next question. Actually, it's more about the different abilities. So we see it when we do press launches, and there's a group of anywhere between probably 6 and maybe even up to 12. Okay, you have a guide rider and a follow rider, and sometimes a rider in the middle who are guides. But you do see the guys who are much more experienced and advanced riders who often want to be at the front of the group, and they're pushing and they want to be testing the bike. It's not just about showing off, it's about making sure that you are understanding what the suspension does in certain situations or how the tires are or what the reactions of the throttle is like. But equally you get the guys who are just starting out who aren't perhaps as dynamic. But anyway, my question is, what about all those different riding abilities? Have you got any tips about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another issue, the massive difference in abilities. And, like, me and John and Bo there, the abilities, well, apart from the Isle of Man TT, obviously, John's a bit of a special person there. But, on the track, we're not that much different. We kind of know what each other's going to do. So the abilities are very close, let's say, compared to, riding on the road. You could have somebody that's very new, and obviously the newer riders, there's all those different issues that an experience and trying to keep up and that kind of peer pressure. And then, somebody that kind of wants to blast ahead and overtake, and somebody who's not on the right line, so and then they're trying to stick to this formation, especially if they're an experienced rider. They're going, oh, I've got to stick in formation, and it takes their mind off what we really should be doing when we're riding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility on that lead rider, isn't there, in any situation? Mark, what sort of solutions have you got?
Listen, we just lean into that safety bubble, rather than a formation. That advice doesn't work. That safety bubble is a kind of primary, roadcraft technique, whether you're riding alone or in a group. And we've got a few clips just to go through, just to kind of emphasize, what we've been shown, that the position on the road, the size of the actual safety bubble, and how it changes, and it gives you that kind of envelope of time and space and vision while optimizing your position. So that's kind of like part of a riding fundamental, ride to what you can see and be seen. So the safety bubble lends itself to that. So using those time-based gaps, and it kind of needs to be about 3 seconds. If somebody cuts in front of you, you need to back up and, restore that buffer and then go back to positioning for your visibility and your safety bubble using that line, that dynamic line that lets you see your hazards, even if it breaks the kind of so-called formation. So, micro adjustments, we don't want any sudden reactions, and you see in groups as well, like people are just like belting along, and it's just, you get that accordion effect. If there's an issue, then somebody's accelerating, somebody's on the brakes, etc., etc. And just spreading out, if you catch traffic, let the pack sort of stretch out and reconnect, one decision at a time. And overtaking, I see overtaking as a really big issue, especially, one rider's kind of, if say there's 2 riders close together and the rider behind's going, oh yeah, well, he's going to overtake, but then that other rider's got a different expectation. No, I'm going to stay here. So and then he goes, oh, well, maybe I'll go now. And then next minute, both of them go at the same time. I've seen that as well. So, it's just that pressure to keep up. It's not a good thing, especially with a formation.
Yeah, we're all it affects every single one of us, doesn't it? Because again, in those situations, as talking about before about group riding and on press launches, you often find yourselves on some beautiful mountain roads that are twisty because the manufacturer wants to demonstrate the bikes in sort of a best environment. But equally, come with those kind of environments, with those kind of roads, comes traffic because they're often quite pretty, well tarmacked roads. And you find exactly that situation. You might be the 3rd or 4th rider in a group. The first 2 have gone by the caravan, and the 3rd rider gets there and is like wanting to go, and you've got a blind bend, you can't go, and then I'm just feeling right. Well, I've got to keep my gap to the guy in front, because if he goes, or if he doesn't go, or if he breaks, or he kind of half goes, and you've got to keep that safety gap, haven't you? You've just got to make sure that you are riding to your own ability and your own situation, especially on a press test. But what about before you set off? There must be some tips and advice you've got there for like a pre-ride setup, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of on the the lead rider or the organizer or something like that. And it's quite funny, because when I was really doing heaps of training, especially the early days in my school, I'd often go to these group rides to not so much drum up business, but just talk to the riders and see what they need and the community and that type of stuff. And I actually ended up getting amazing like customers for life from that. And it was a lot of it came down to, because I'd see a rider and I'd go, oh, this guy is going to get, or girl is going to get killed. And I say, listen, come to this day for free and save your life. And then the next minute, they'd kind of understand, what I'm talking about. And, we talk about the 20 hours versus 1,000 hours, and they'd come back and then they'd pay, and they'd turn into some of the best customers. And then some of the riders, especially young blokes, I'd say, listen, just stop riding on the road and go to the track. So then I'd train them on the track, because they're just, I've been in that situation, we're all young and crazy, at one stage. So yeah, but back to your question, setting that expectation, and again, talk about the safety bubble before the helmets go on, especially if you're a lead rider. It's really important, to take the lead and, not just on the road, but with, a ride kind of plan, especially with inexperienced riders, encouraging space. That's a big thing, what's going to happen. They're all going to bunch up, right? So talk about it, especially inexperienced riders. Signaling hazards is a good one. I've seen that work a few times. There's a bit of gravel or something, and one of the riders put their arm up. There's something going on there. Slow down a bit. And the modern helmet comms are great. I see riders all talking to each other on the helmet, and I think that can be a really useful thing, especially if there's a hazard around the corner. And then another good tip is actually like building in regroup points. Moments where you can kind of all catch up, because people stretch out and you overtake a car, whatever. Some people get stuck, like you say, behind the caravan. Just stop, bunch up again and have a bit of a chat. And then highlighting kind of, stories like survival stories over the hero stories. You don't want to be talking about, some person saying, oh, you see me getting my knee down, or you like, that's totally not. It's about, using the safety bubble and celebrating, hey, yeah, that really helped me there because that, bike stopped suddenly or the car bunched up. But I think one of the biggest things is talking about is overtaking. And I think, if the group is really, if it's a big group, like just overtaking is such a big risk, expectations on the timing and safely overtaking, that can kind of not end well. So it's better to be really cool with the overtaking stuff.
I like the point you made there about reaching almost like regrouping. So perhaps at the end, the advice I'd certainly offer there is to make sure that at the beginning of the ride, before anyone's turned an engine on, is to just make sure that everyone knows what the destination is or where the first stop point is. Or, you've got an understanding that if the group gets split up, then you'll wait in the next lay-by or at the next junction. And make sure that everyone knows what to expect. So don't panic as soon if you get lost, if you get split up, don't worry, because just keep an eye out for the rest of the group at the next lay-by or at the next junction, and you'll soon regroup. Because sometimes it's that panic that makes you then want to ride faster to catch the group, and then also all that training and all those better riding thoughts and tips and advice go out the window. Just focused on taking the next corner like Lukey Heights.
Exactly.
Mark, there's a whole host of stuff to this group riding, isn't there? What are we going to talk moving on to?
Well, yeah, it's kind of just reaffirming like there's real tragedies, coming out of this. There's kind of like a dark side to group riding, and I kind of think we need to be talking about it, and bringing it up, and I think it's all about this, the form of this staggered riding. It's kind of prioritized over the spacing. And that's kind of is like a kind of liability. And when I go out and group rides, I kind of like almost see inexperienced riders almost like lemmings. It just can see it unfolding, before it happens, and go, well, you're a rider. Let's talk about this safety bubble, right? To what you can see, not to what the pack dictates. Protect your margin, and bring yourself home. That's the key thing out of this, right?
Exactly that. You always got to judge your situation as well. In my mind, we talk about group riding, and your mind conscious of all sorts of pictures and experiences, and it's all very well if you've got a beautiful flowing mountain or a valley road almost, so you can see a mile, 2 miles in front of you in a straight line. Fine, you can do that formation so long as you're maybe not 1 second, 2 seconds. Leaving yourself plenty of time and space, and you've got that vision. It's all sort of going back to the basics of riding, making sure you can see and you're looking out for it. But you spoke earlier, Mark, you mentioned that group riding, particularly on the road, makes you anxious. Perhaps you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, that we showed that picture, at Phillip Island, and no kidding, if I go out on a group ride with riders that I don't know, I have more anxiety than when I'm doing this at 200 kilometers an hour. And, Mr. McGuinness, as you rightly spotted, his tire is leaving marks on my leathers. And Bo at the back, he's doing the same with John. And, I think it just highlights, the risk of group riding that, that I feel that way. And, like I said, this can happen safely because we're all the same level, international level riders. That is the key thing. And it's a stark contrast to road riders, abilities, attitude, ego. It can all vary incredibly. And, when you bring in this kind of staggered attitude, which is kind of, I think it's a flaw, it makes the group riding super risky.
There's a lot of confidence, respect and understanding, but also what's the word I'm looking for there? When the three of you are riding on the track together, you respect each other. You certainly know each other's ability, and sometimes you find that on track days, don't you? As well, I think that if you are riding in a particular group, you can kind of understand that the majority of riders are going to be having a similar ability, but you still got to make sure don't be riding on track days like you and Mr. McGuinness are on the track there. There's a lot of information here, Mark, and there's a lot of things to kind of go out and learn and talk about with the guys who you do normally, I'm talking about to our viewers here, the people that you normally go and ride with. If you ride in the group regularly, I'm sure you've got a lot of advice and tips and tricks of your own, but there's a lot of advice here as well. Mark, do you want to kind of maybe summarize it? What are your closing thoughts here?
Yeah, like you say, Michael, we spoke a lot, but I think for me, it's kind of simple. This formation riding, it's kind of like really just have a think about that. And, I'd be putting that in the bin and focus on the safety bubble. But like you said, I'm really keen to hear the viewers, thoughts and experiences on group riding. So tell us in the comments and we'll have a good read there.
Sure. So a lot of it's about respecting everybody else in the group, communicating before you even set off, and learning what those communication things are. We didn't really talk, well, you touched on a little bit on about hand signals, and certainly, you can point at your tank or tap your tank if you want some fuel. That's the one I use. Or you point at whether it's roadkill or gravel or petrol, diesel on the ground. You can point at things. There's so many other little tips and tricks out there, but everybody in the group who's riding with you needs to know what they all mean, because there's no point in doing this or pointing at something and the next person down the road hasn't got a clue what you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, I'll just reiterate it then. If you've got some tips, tricks, advice, hints, or anything else, please, we'll look forward to filling up the comments section, and we'll get involved there as well. Mark, what can we look forward to in the next episode?
Yeah, next episode 24. So it's a real deep dive on trail braking. So, it's with motorbike riders, the term trail braking, and, road riders are the trigger. So we're really going to dig in and try and debunk that once and for all, and talk about trail braking on the road.
Good. I'm definitely looking forward to that one. There's a lot of people talking about trail braking who don't perhaps understand what it is. They are perhaps misunderstanding what trail braking is. So I think that's going to be a fascinating and very important episode. Mark, brilliant. Great information. Great to see you. Thanks for your time, mate. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
No worries. Thanks, Michael. Cheers.
I'll just wrap it up then, firstly by saying thank you to Honda Motorcycles UK for supporting this series. In the meantime, don't forget to check out all of the other Better Riding episodes as well. We can all be better at riding motorbikes. Every single person who rides, whether you've been doing it for 5 days or 50 years, you can be better, I promise. So there's 3 other places for me to talk about right now. Firstly, search for Bennetts Bike Club. It's the club, it's not Fight Club, don't talk about Fight Club, but we encourage you to talk about Bike Club. So it's a social media site essentially that we own and run, and it's full of us riders and actual experts as well to answer any motorcycle related questions. And a similar offering, we do have a private Facebook group. You're welcome to come and join us there. There's over 10,000 people in there already, so that's cool. That's called Bennetts BikeSocial. And then finally, we offer a rewards scheme called BikeSocial membership. That's free if you insure your bike directly with Bennetts. Otherwise, it's £6 a month or £60 a year. And there's over 150 different motorcycle apparel, clothing, training discounts. Just search BikeSocial membership. Good stuff. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Honda Motorcycles are supporting this series because safety is one of their key business pillars, and their quest for safety inspires their innovations in products, technology and education, which is why they're committed to achieving 0 traffic fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide by 2050.